Hello and welcome. I'm Aaron Vandervoort, President of Enercom. Today I'm joined with Dan Genovese, our Director of Consulting Services at Enercom. And we wanted to have a little bit of a brief discussion with you all on the RNG market and what we're seeing. Certainly here in the last little bit, we've seen momentum building as on April 7th, Rice Energy Acquisition Corp, a recently formed SPAC, announced a deal to acquire Aria Energy for $680 million and Archaea Energy for $347, combining two of the largest entities in this space and creating kind of a national benchmark for producers of zero carbon renewable natural gas captured in landfills. And so as we saw some of that, we've seen some of the discussion in and around our conference at the Venture Summit, as well as out in Dallas. It's natural for us to have the discussion, and Enercom is actively engaged in consulting with a number of companies in and around this space. And so Dan's leading that effort. And so Dan, welcome.
Hey, thanks for having the discussion. It's boy, the momentum behind renewable natural gas, or RNG, is growing at a really fast clip. And so it's a timely discussion. We put this on the schedule to talk about what Enercom is doing in the space, maybe give some people a little bit of a background, and then this big SPAC deal comes out, and it's really backed by people who are very well grounded in traditional oil and gas. So that's what makes it really interesting and really timely, because, like you said, at our Energy Investment Summit with Colorado School of Mines in February, we had some conversations around renewable natural gas and its ability to have a negative carbon intensity. And we've been doing some consulting with some companies. And within that consulting, there's been a lot of conversations with what we would consider traditional oil and gas companies, whether they be integrated oil and gas companies and pipeline companies, trying to understand the market and looking at it in terms of, how can they use this to reduce their carbon footprint and achieve their ESG goals of carbon neutrality, given the timeframes that they've made corporate commitments to. And I think that that's the really exciting piece of it, just in terms of background. And certainly, if I don't make anything clear, Aaron, certainly let me know and I'll try and clarify. But the simplistic aspect of it is that you can have agriculture, and manure is a huge source of that agriculture feedstock. And then you have landfills where, these are municipal landfills or private landfills where municipal waste is dumped, covered, and as that starts to decompose, produces methane gas. You have wastewater treatment plants. That's human waste that also goes through the same decomposition process. And then food waste, which is maybe a little bit tougher nut to crack in terms of getting enough of that food waste to feed a digester. But basically, any of these feedstocks can be put in an anaerobic environment, and as it accelerates the decomposition, and you get waste streams. There's CO2, there's methane, there's nitrogen and sulfur that are also produced, which are all processed out very much with similar technology, maybe just a little bit robust from what we see in terms of processing equipment for natural gas out of the traditional oil and gas space. And then it's put on pipelines. And the greenhouse gas avoidance that is in this process, because naturally this stuff, just as it decomposes, vents to the atmosphere, methane. The avoidance actually makes this fuel, this methane, to varying degrees, either extremely low carbon or negative carbon. I've certainly seen some dairy farms where the negative carbon intensity is negative 250, and that's a little bit of a how many tons of CO2 are being taken out of the atmosphere. And the value of this, comparatively, it's certainly not as cheap as traditional natural gas, which right now is in about the $3 range. What makes this valuable is the environmental attributes and programs like the Federal Renewable Fuel Standard that many people have heard, like D3, which is a fuel credit that a typical gasoline and diesel refinery needs to buy per that federal renewable fuel standard. And then in California, you hear a lot of talk about the low carbon fuel standard, which is the requirement for obligated parties in California, refiners again, to buy credits and to put this renewable gas into transportation, specifically compressed natural gas transportation. And that tends to center around heavy duty trucking out in California. And the value of those credits is what really drives the economics. The mandates drives the economics of these projects. And like I said, it supports compressed natural gas vehicles. And so that's really kind of the ecosystem around it. And like I said, the real interest, I think, from traditional oil and gas is this fuel. One, it's extremely familiar to them because oil and gas companies, pipeline companies have been handling natural gas and the transportation of it and processing of it. So it's definitely an energy source that they understand. And so that's what we look at. And I'll turn it back over to you because you and I talk a lot about the energy transition and what we've coined the energy transition 2.0. And so that's where I really think this fuel fits in.
Yeah, and I think you make up a couple really interesting points. It's, we've talked about this carbon neutrality and movement towards carbon neutrality, and we've kind of landed on three key things that have to happen for operators to make that work. One, new technology and investment in that technology, and that'll help. Two, there's heavy engineering that has to happen, and we heard that from Netherlands Sewell at our conference, and what reservoirs are actually going to be able to maybe capture some of this carbon. And then three, there's an offset in financial market, but there's also this investment in renewables. And so as we think about more and more companies setting a carbon neutral mandate, if you will, or goal out there, investments have to happen. And we talk a lot about, the energy transition, as you mentioned, the economics, and maybe you can share a little bit more on the economic side, as I know you're evaluating different deals and looking at those types of things with clients. I think that is something that makes energy transition 2.0 look a little bit different, is the ability to generate returns as associated with some of these investments, if you will.
Yeah, so kind of a couple things on that. One, when we think about oil and gas, I think if you go through some of the most recent studies and projections, like from EIA, and you think about the environmental goal of being carbon neutral by 2050, which seems to be a real target date for many corporations, whether they're in oil and gas or whether they're a tech company. You look at that data and you say, well, 50% of our energy source, the foundation, is still going to rely on oil and gas, 50%. And that doesn't sound very carbon neutral in reality. So it leaves you with two choices. One, developing sources that are negative carbon, like renewable natural gas, and carbon capture. And you're right, it was addressed quite a bit at our conference in Dallas just a couple of weeks ago is that, the technology, the engineering, and the economics of it, and talked a lot about that. I think one of the big drivers is, I mentioned already, the federal renewable fuel standard and the California low carbon fuel standard as being drivers for these. But I think there's going to be a second marketplace for this renewable natural gas, and that is these voluntary buyers. So if you're a tech company, for example, and we've certainly had some conversations with some of these tech companies, again, they understand as the future becomes a little bit more clear that oil and gas is still going to power their data centers and so many of these other things. So how do they get to carbon neutral? Well, they voluntarily go out and they buy and help support these projects that drive the economics for negative carbon fuel like renewable natural gas. And it's going to be interesting to see how this market develops and how those contracts kind of come to fruition. What are the price points, for those negative carbon, that negative carbon energy? What's the length and term of that agreement?
Mhm.
Because that's obviously pretty critical. It's tough to fund a project, that is in the tens of millions of dollars, with a 1-year agreement for negative carbon. So it's going to be interesting to see how it all develops, and that's one of the things that Enercom has developed experience and expertise in, is understanding these markets, identifying players that are driving this market and our resources within this market, looking at investment opportunities, understanding the economics. We've done modeling around these projects and understand that there's, a handful of key economic drivers when you look at projects that make it investable or not. So those are some of the things that we've been working on to help develop specifically the renewable natural gas project. And and it's kind of interesting, when you look at how do you drive at a, say a dairy farm, how do you drive that carbon intensity, or what we call a CI score, lower or more negative? Listen, adding solar onto the projects, that's another thing that kind of gets teased into this whole notion of carbon neutrality and developing a low carbon fuel. And I think another thing that's going to be interesting, not only these voluntary contracts, but this is something that's really intriguing. If you think about people saying that hydrogen is really kind of the end goal, is the energy end goal. Blue hydrogen, developed from renewable natural gas, is a very viable and easier process through reformation, which is a technology that we know a lot about, substantially easier than electrolysis, which is kind of the other idea, using spare solar and wind to create hydrogen, which is a way to store that solar and wind. The same thing can be true for biomethane, renewable natural gas. You'll hear those terms somewhat interchangeable. And I think that that's going to be really interesting to see how this renewable natural gas product can then be a stepping stone into blue hydrogen. So, you have, like I said, integrated oil companies that have this obligation because they have a refining arm looking at this as a solution. I think they're also looking at it as a way to maybe have more control over the D3 RINs market. So those credits they're obligated to buy, if they know that they have a source of them, and they can maybe peg that value at a lower value long term than what the current market is trading. It's like almost like a built-in hedge strategy that generates a return for them. So not only a return on the project level, but you know, any arbitrage between, say, you know, $1.50 RIN contract price and $3 where it's at right now, you have that arbitrage as well, which, you know, an integrated oil company would be great. Think of the pipelines, and you can probably guess, Aaron, you know, what value is it to look at renewable natural gas for a midstream or a pipeline company?
I mean, and that's the thing that, you know, it's traditional oil and gas being as a part of this. It's the same methane that they're moving through those pipes today.
That's
And,
right.
and pipeline companies get paid on moving volumes and products. And so to the extent that they can do that and get credits, this is where I think these movements and taking a holistic approach makes sense, because now returns are tied and economics are tied to integrate these types of things. And so I think it's an ever-changing space. I know you're keeping up on it on a daily basis with calls and models and evaluations and numbers on it. But we would certainly welcome any of our clients, anyone thinking about exploring some of this RIN market. How could it benefit or look into what they're doing as a part of an ESG program or even as a part of a goal, to have that discussion with Enercom and with Dan. We think that this is something that will continue to be an evolving space, and we'll keep our eye on it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely evolving. It's growing, and I think that we see that these deals are really validating the market as being an investable space.
There's no doubt. Dan, thank you for your time.
You bet. Thanks, Aaron.
Right.